They called her barren, 24 years old, unmarried, wasting her life in a cafe that should have been hers. They whispered it behind cupped hands. They said it to her face. They made sure she heard it at her father's funeral, at family dinners she was no longer invited to, at the engagement party, where she served champagne to the man who had promised to love her. Seraphine Rousseau scrubbed dried coffee rings from table 7 at 3 in the morning, her fingers raw, her feet aching, her heart a stone in her chest. She didn't know that beneath the cracked floorboards, beneath 200 years of foundation, beneath the bones of Paris itself, a king had been sleeping, waiting, listening for a voice that sounded like home. She didn't know that in 14 minutes she would speak 7 words in a language she barely remembered, and everything would shatter. The curse, the silence, the small gray life she had built from the ruins of her father's death. In 48 hours, the man who called her worthless would kneel. The woman who stole her inheritance would wear handcuffs. And Seraphine Rousseau, the failed daughter, the pitied waitress, the woman too broken to deserve love, would stand before all of Paris and hear a vampire king call her his queen. This is how it happened. The neon sign above Café Lumière had been dying for 3 years. Tonight it gave its last flicker at exactly 2:47 a.m., the letter U going dark, leaving only Café Lumière glowing weakly against the Montmartre fog. Seraphine didn't notice. She was elbow-deep in sudsy water-scrubbing plates because the dishwasher had quit 2 weeks ago, and Isolde refused to hire a replacement. Cost-cutting measures, her stepmother had said, lips pursed. We need to maximize profit before the sale. The sale. Those 2 words had haunted Seraphine for 30 days now. 30 days since Isolde had stood in this very cafe surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits and announced that Café Lumière, the Rousseau family legacy for 200 years, would be sold to a developer. They wanted to tear it down, build luxury condos, erase 2 centuries of history for granite countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows. Seraphine had 30 days to come up with 500,000 euros, 30 days to save the only home she had left. She had 17 euros in her bank account. The clock on the wall ticked past 2:50 a.m. Outside, Paris slept. Inside, Seraphine's hands moved mechanically. Scrub, rinse, stack, scrub, rinse, stack. The rhythm was meditative, numbing, exactly what she needed. She couldn't think about tomorrow. Tomorrow was the engagement party. Bastien and Colette, her ex-fiancé and her stepsister. They had chosen to host it here in her cafe, in the place where Bastien had first kissed her, where he had proposed on one knee beside table 12, where he had promised forever. That was before her father died, before the money disappeared, before Bastien realized that Seraphine Rousseau, orphan and waitress, was not the investment he had thought. The plate in her hands cracked, a clean break right down the center. Seraphine stared at the 2 halves white porcelain with a delicate gold rim, part of the set her mother had chosen in 1995. For the cancer. Before Seraphine learned that some griefs never heal, they just go quiet. She threw both pieces in the trash. The cafe was too quiet. It had been quiet for 2.5 years, since the funeral, since Isolde had taken over the books and discovered with theatrical shock that there was no money. The inheritance Seraphine's father had promised was smoke, debt and back taxes and a cafe mortgage that should have been paid off decades ago. Isolde had held up the paperwork like evidence at a trial, her 2 daughters flanking her, matching expressions of pity and contempt. He left you nothing, Isolde had said. I'm sorry, Seraphine. I know you expected more. But you're young, you'll recover. Perhaps you should think about moving on, finding a husband, starting fresh somewhere else. Somewhere else. As if Seraphine's entire life wasn't built into these walls. As if she hadn't spent every summer of her childhood watching her father grind coffee beans at dawn, teaching her the difference between Arabica and Robusta, telling her stories about her mother who had loved this place, who had died when Seraphine was 5, but whose presence still lingered in the way the afternoon light hit the corner booth. Table 7, where her father always sat. Where he had taught Seraphine to read first in French, then in English, then when she was 12, and obsessed with medieval history and Old French from the yellow journal her mother had left behind. Seraphine dried her hands on a dish towel and walked to table 7, sat down in her father's chair. The cafe stretched around her, empty and accusing. 40 tables, 200 years of memories, all of it slipping through her fingers like water. She closed her eyes. 2.5 years ago, November rain against the church windows, the smell of lilies and old wood, and too many bodies pressed into pews designed for Sunday service, not grief. Seraphine had stood at the front alone. Isolde sat in the first row with Colette and Margot, dabbing at dry eyes with lace handkerchiefs, accepting condolences with gracious nods. The grieving widow, the devastated stepmother. Seraphine had wanted to scream. Instead, she had stood beside the closed casket, her father's favorite tie draped over the polished wood, and listened to people she barely knew talk about a man they understood even less. He was so vibrant, someone said. Such a shame about his heart. His heart. The doctors had called it sudden cardiac arrest. 48 years old and healthy until he wasn't. Until Isolde found him collapsed in the cafe kitchen, already gone, the espresso he'd been making still hissing on the counter. Seraphine had arrived 20 minutes later. She had held his hand. It was already cold. The funeral was a blur of black dresses and murmured sympathies. Bastian had stood beside her, his hand on her lower back, his cologne too strong in the incense-thick air. He had whispered the right things. "I'm here. I've got you. We'll get through this." 3 weeks later, he had taken her to dinner. Expensive wine, candlelight, the kind of ambiance designed for proposals or breakups. "I can't do this anymore," he had said. His face had been carefully arranged into regret. "You understand, don't you? It's not about the money. It's about stability. Future. I need a partner who can contribute equally. And right now, Sarah, you're drowning." She had stared at him, at the man she had loved since university. The man who had studied her old French textbooks with her, who had laughed when she translated medieval poetry at 2 in the morning, who had promised that her obsession with dead languages was charming. Drowning, she had repeated. He had reached across the table, taken her hand. "It's not your fault. Your father left you in an impossible situation. I just can't be dragged down with you." She had pulled her hand back, left the restaurant, walked home in the rain. Cried only once she was safely inside the cafe where no one could see. 2 months after that, Bastian had started dating Colette, Seraphine's stepsister. 26 years old, blonde, beautiful, with a trust fund from her late father and a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Colette had always looked at Seraphine with thinly veiled contempt, the way someone might look at a stray dog. Pitiful, dirty, unwanted. Now Colette had Bastian. And tomorrow she would parade him through the cafe like a trophy, making sure Seraphine saw exactly what she had lost. The memory dissolved. Seraphine opened her eyes. The cafe was still empty, still hers, for 29 more days. She stood, walked behind the counter, poured herself a coffee she didn't want just to have something to do with her hands. The espresso machine hissed and sputtered, old and temperamental, held together with duct tape and prayer. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like something alive. The door chimed. Seraphine's head snapped up. It was 2:58 a.m. The cafe had been closed since midnight. She had locked the door herself. But there in the entrance, backlit by the broken neon sign, stood a figure. Tall, male, wearing a coat that looked like it had been cut in a century that didn't use zippers. Dark hair falling past his collar in waves that suggested he had never heard of a salon. And his eyes. His eyes were wrong, not color contacts wrong, not sleep-deprived wrong. They were silver, actually silver, like moonlight trapped in glass. He looked at her and the world went still. The espresso machine stopped hissing. The clock on the wall stopped ticking. Even the fog outside seemed to freeze mid-swirl. "We're closed," Seraphine said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The man tilted his head, studied her the way someone might study a painting in a museum. Not leering, not dismissive, simply seeing. "I know," he said. His voice was velvet wrapped around a blade. Soft enough to draw you close, sharp enough to cut when you leaned in. He moved into the cafe with footsteps she couldn't hear. 3 strides and he was at table 7, her father's table. He pulled out a chair and sat with the kind of grace that suggested he had spent centuries perfecting the art of sitting. "Do you serve in the old tongue?" he asked. Seraphine blinked. "What? Your service? Your menu?" He gestured vaguely at the chalkboard listing espresso drinks in looping cursive upon her one. "Do you serve in the old tongue?" "We're in Paris," Seraphine said slowly. "Obviously I speak French." "Yes." His lips curved into something that might have been a smile if smiles could draw blood. "But do you serve in the old tongue?" The way he said serve made it sound like a ritual, a spell, something far more significant than handing someone a coffee. Seraphine looked around the cafe as if the peeling wallpaper might offer an escape route. This was insane. She should call the police. She should run. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'll serve anyone in Old French for 10,000 euros. It was meant as a joke, a way to end this bizarre conversation and get this strange man out of her cafe. He laughed. It was the coldest sound Seraphine had ever heard. Ancient, like wind through a crypt. Like the last breath of something that should have died centuries ago. The laugh echoed through the cafe, bouncing off walls, growing louder instead of fading. And the clock on the wall, the clock that had been ticking steadily for 15 years, stopped. Seraphine's eyes snapped to it. The second hand hung frozen between the 4 and the 5. Behind the counter, the espresso machine hissed. She spun around. It was off. She had turned it off. But steam was rising from the spout, curling through the air like fingers reaching for something. What the hell? My apologies. The man's voice was softer now, almost human. Almost. I forget myself sometimes. It has been so long since someone made me laugh. Seraphine's hand found the counter behind her, gripped it hard enough that her knuckles went white. Who are you, Pawn? Lysander, he said simply. He tilted his head again, studying her with those impossible silver eyes. And you are Seraphine. Her blood went cold. How do you... Your name tag. He pointed. She looked down. Oh, right, the plastic rectangle pinned to her apron, the one that said Seraphine in faded letters because Isolde was too cheap to print new ones. She was being an idiot. He was just some eccentric rich guy. Paris was full of them. Eccentric rich guys who wore antique coats and had weird contact lenses and asked strange questions at 3 in the morning. Except the clock was still stopped. Except the espresso machine was still steaming. Except when she looked at the window behind him, she saw her own reflection. Pale face, dark circles under her eyes, hair escaping from his ponytail. But his reflection was wrong. In the glass, his shadow had wings, huge spreading wings that stretched from floor to ceiling, blocking out the street behind him, even though there was no light source to cast such a shadow. They moved slightly, rustling like feathers, or leather, or something in between. Seraphine's breath caught in her throat. I would like a coffee, Lysander said, as if nothing strange was happening at all, as if the world hadn't just tilted sideways. Black, no sugar, and I would very much appreciate it if you would serve me. He paused, his smile sharpened. In the old tongue. Her legs moved on autopilot, carried her behind the counter. Her hands found the coffee pot, poured the impossible steam into a white ceramic cup that had a chip on the rim. She walked to his table, set the cup down carefully, and then, because she had spent 4 years studying French literature before dropping out to care for her dying father, because she was exhausted and terrified, and maybe because some part of her recognized that this moment was important in a way she couldn't understand, she spoke. The words came from her mother's journal, from the old French lessons her father had helped her translate, from a language that had been dead for 500 years. Je vous sers de tout mon cœur, monseigneur. I serve you with all my heart, my lord. The words left her mouth and became something else. They echoed through the cafe like her voice had multiplied by 1,000, layering over itself, harmonizing in impossible ways. The air shimmered. The lights flickered. The coffee in Lysander's cup began to glow. Gold. Pure, radiant gold. His eyes widened. For the first time since he had walked in, he looked surprised. Remarkable, he breathed. After all these centuries, remarkable. He lifted the cup to his lips and drank. The glow faded as he swallowed, and for just a second, Seraphine could have sworn his skin looked less pale, more alive. Color bloomed in his cheeks. His silver eyes blazed brighter. When he set the cup down, it was empty. He stood in one fluid motion, reaching into his coat. Seraphine's hand instinctively moved toward the knife they kept under the counter for emergencies. But Lysander pulled out a small leather pouch and placed it on the table. 10,000 euros, he said quietly, as promised. Seraphine stared at the pouch, at him, at the wings in the window reflection that were slowly folding away. Who are you, she whispered. Someone who has been asleep for a very long time. Lysander moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her with those silver eyes. Thank you, Seraphine. You have no idea what you have just done. Wait, but he was already gone. The door swinging shut behind him with a soft chime. The clock started ticking again. Seraphine stood frozen for 10 full seconds before her legs gave out and she sat down hard on the nearest chair. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the leather pouch. She opened it. Gold coins spilled onto the table, old and heavy, stamped with faces she didn't recognize. Kings and queens from centuries past, their profiles worn smooth by time. She counted them. Once, twice, 3 times. 15 coins, each one stamped with a different date. 1349, 1401, 1478, 1523, 1551. In the window, her reflection stared back at her with wide, terrified eyes. And somewhere in the distance, something howled. Seraphine didn't sleep. She sat on the cafe floor until sunrise. The gold coins spread around her like fallen stars. 15 of them. She had counted 7 times, each one stamped with dates from the 14th to 16th century. Faces of royalty she vaguely remembered from history class. French kings, long dead, long forgotten. At 4:30 a.m., she had Googled antique gold coins Paris value on her phone, squinting at the screen in the pre-dawn darkness. The internet told her each coin was worth anywhere from 30 to 80,000 euros, depending on condition and rarity. She was holding between 450,000 and 1.2 million euros in her lap. Either that or she was holding very expensive fakes given to her by a very convincing lunatic. At 6 o'clock a.m., she had called in sick to the morning shift, told Isolde she had food poisoning. Her stepmother's voice had been clipped with irritation. The party is at 7 tonight, Seraphine. You will be here. You will work. I don't care if you're dying. Seraphine had hung up without answering. Now it was 3 o'clock p.m., and she sat in a coin shop in the Latin Quarter watching a white-haired man examine one of the 15 coins through a jeweler's loupe. The shop smelled like dust and old paper and metal polish. Seraphine's hands were clasped in her lap so tightly her fingers had gone numb. The man set down his loupe, looked at her over wire-rimmed glasses. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "My father," Seraphine lied. "He collected coins. I found them after he died." The man's expression softened slightly. "I see." He picked up the coin again, turned it over in the light. "This is a French écu d'or, minted in 1478 during the reign of Louis XI. Extremely rare. Museum quality." Seraphine's heart hammered against her ribs. "How much is it worth?" "At auction 60 to 70,000 euros. Possibly more to the right collector." The room tilted. "Are you all right?" The man half rose from his chair. Seraphine forced herself to nod. "I'm fine, thank you. I need to think about this." She left the shop on unsteady legs, the coin burning a hole in her pocket. 70,000 euros for one coin. She had 14 more. The math was simple, brutal, impossible. She had enough money to save the cafe, enough to pay off Isolde, enough to buy back her life. The question was why? Why had a stranger with silver eyes and shadow wings given her a fortune? What did he want? What had she agreed to when she spoke those words in old French, "Je vous sers de tout mon cœur, monseigneur"? I serve you with all my heart, my lord. Serve. That word again. The way he had said it like a ritual, a binding. Seraphine walked through the Latin Quarter without seeing it. Her mind raced, circled, crashed against the same impossible truth. Something was wrong with Lysander. Something inhuman. She had seen his wings in the reflection, seen the way the coffee glowed, felt the way the world stopped when he laughed. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But she was also holding 70,000 euros in her pocket with 14 more coins hidden in her apartment. And tonight she would have to serve champagne to the man who had abandoned her and the stepsister who had stolen him, and she was so tired of being afraid. So tired of being small. So tired of being worthless. Her phone buzzed. A text from Isolde. "Don't be late. The caterers arrive at 6. Seraphine looked at the message, at the coins in her pocket, at the darkening sky above Paris. She turned around, walked back to Montmartre, back to Café Lumière. She was going to need answers. And she had a feeling Lysander would come back for them. The cafe was transformed. White tablecloths, crystal champagne flutes, towers of macarons in pastel colors, a string quartet tuning instruments in the corner, flowers everywhere expensive and fragrant, filling the air with the cloying scent of forced celebration. Seraphine stood behind the bar in her black server uniform, hands clasped, face carefully blank. Isolde swept through the cafe like a general inspecting troops. 48 years old and beautiful in that sharp, maintained way that required money and discipline. Blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. Diamonds at her throat, a dress that cost more than Seraphine made in 6 months. "You look terrible," Isolde said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Try to smile. This is a happy occasion." Colette and Margot stood near the entrance greeting early arrivals. Both wore designer dresses. Both looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. Both ignored Seraphine completely. Guests began to flood in. Society types, business associates, friends of the family who had known Seraphine as a child and now looked through her like glass. And then Bastien arrived. He looked good. He always looked good. Dark suit, styled hair, the kind of confident smile that made people lean in, want to please him, want to be chosen by him. Seraphine's stomach turned to lead. He saw her. His smile faltered for just a second. Then he was moving toward her, Colette on his arm, and Seraphine wanted to run, but her feet were rooted to the floor. Sarah, Bastian said. His voice was warm, familiar. The voice that had whispered, I love you in the dark. It's good to see you. Colette's smile was all teeth. Yes, Sarah, we're so glad you could work tonight. I know this must be difficult for you. There it was. The knife slipped between ribs with practiced ease. Seraphine's hands tightened on the bar towel she was holding. Congratulations, she managed. I hope you'll be very happy. We will be, Colette's eyes glittered. Bastian is everything I could have hoped for. Stable, successful. Nothing like... She stopped, smiled wider. Well, the unspoken words hung in the air. Nothing like the desperate, broke, unmarried failure you turned out to be. Bastian had the grace to look uncomfortable. Colette, maybe we should champagne, Isolde announced, appearing beside them with two glasses. To new beginnings. The party swirled around Seraphine. Laughter, music, the clink of crystal, and the murmur of expensive conversation. She moved through it like a ghost, refilling drinks, clearing plates, watching from the margins as people celebrated in her cafe. Her cafe, that would be sold in 29 days. At 9 p.m. Isolde clinked a fork against her glass. The room quieted. Thank you all for coming, Isolde said, her voice carrying across the crowded cafe. We're here to celebrate Colette and Bastian, of course. But I also wanted to share some exciting news about Café Lumière itself. Seraphine's blood went cold. As many of you know, Isolde continued, this cafe has been in the Rousseau family for 200 years. My late husband loved it dearly. But times change. Progress waits for no one. She smiled, bright and brittle. I'm pleased to announce that Café Lumière has been sold to Moreau Development. They plan to transform this space into luxury condominiums. The sale will be finalized in 30 days. The room erupted in polite applause. Seraphine felt like she was drowning. Of course, Isolde added, looking directly at Seraphine now. If anyone wished to purchase the cafe themselves, they would need to present 500,000 euros by the end of the month. But I think we all know that's unlikely. More laughter, knowing, cruel. Seraphine's vision tunneled. She was aware of faces turning toward her, pity in some, schadenfreude in others. Bastian looked away. She set down the champagne bottle she was holding very carefully. If she didn't, she would throw it. The door chimed. Every head in the cafe turned. Lysander stood in the entrance. He looked different tonight. Still wearing that antique coat, but beneath it, a shirt that might have been silk, might have been shadow. His dark hair caught the light like oil. His silver eyes swept the room, cataloging, assessing, and finally landing on Seraphine. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. We're closed, Isolde said sharply. This is a private event. Lysander's gaze didn't leave Seraphine. I'm not here for the party. He crossed the cafe in 3 long strides. The crowd parted for him without thinking. Instinct. The same instinct that made prey step aside for predators. He stopped in front of Seraphine, reached into his coat, pulled out another leather pouch. You left this last night, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I thought you might need it. He placed the pouch on the bar. It landed with a heavy clink. Seraphine stared at it, at him. I didn't leave anything. Didn't you? His lips curved, not quite a smile. I believe we had an arrangement. 10,000 euros for service in the old tongue. But I underpaid you. He pushed the pouch toward her. Consider this, a retainer. The cafe had gone silent. Every eye on them. Seraphine opened the pouch with shaking hands. More gold coins, another 15, dates ranging from 1349 to 1551. Another €1,000,000. What do you want? She whispered. Lysander leaned in, close enough that she could see the inhuman silver of his eyes, close enough to feel the cold radiating from his skin like winter. I want you to serve me, he said quietly, the way you did last night, the way your bloodline has served mine for 500 years. And in return, I will give you everything you need to take back what's yours. Behind them, Isolde made a sound of outrage. Excuse me, but who do you think you... Lysander turned, looked at Isolde, said nothing. Isolde went silent mid-sentence. Her face went pale. Whatever she saw in his eyes, it terrified her. Lysander looked back at Seraphine. 30 days, he said. Serve me for 30 days. I will pay you 500,000 euros. You save your cafe. I get what I need. Everyone wins. Except I don't know what you are, Seraphine said. Her voice was steadier than her hands. Or what serving you means. Or what happens at the end of 30 days. No, Lysander agreed. You don't, but you will. He stepped back. The choice is yours, Seraphine Rousseau. I'll be waiting. He turned and walked toward the door. Wait, Seraphine heard herself say. He paused, looked back. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to throw the coins at his feet and run. But she looked at the cafe, at Isolde's shocked face, at Bastien and Colette frozen by the champagne tower, at 200 years of history about to be demolished for luxury condos, at her father's table where he would never sit again. 30 days, Seraphine said. Every night at 3 a.m., I serve you in Old French. You pay me 500,000 euros, and then we're done. Lysander's smile was slow, dangerous, beautiful. We're done, he agreed. He left without another word. The door chimed shut behind him. Seraphine turned to face the room. 100 people stared at her. Isolde looked like she had been struck. Colette's mouth hung open. Bastien's expression was unreadable. Seraphine picked up the 2 pouches of gold coins. 30 coins? 2 million euros. Enough to buy the cafe 4 times over. The party's over, she said quietly. Everyone out. You can't, Isolde started. I can. Seraphine met her stepmother's eyes. This is still my cafe. For 29 more days. Get out. For the first time in over 2 years, Isolde had nothing to say. The guests filed out in uncomfortable silence. Colette and Margot left without looking back. Bastien hesitated at the door, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it. Isolde was the last to leave. She stopped in front of Seraphine, her face a mask of cold fury. Whatever you think you're doing, she said, voice low and venomous, it won't work. That money is worthless. Those coins are fake. And in 30 days when you can't pay, I will take everything. She left. The cafe door locked behind her with a final click. Seraphine stood alone in the wreckage of the party, white tablecloths and half-empty champagne flutes, and the lingering scent of expensive flowers. She looked down at the coins in her hands, at the impossible fortune a stranger had given her twice now. Outside, the broken neon sign flickered. Café El Mier. Light. Seraphine laughed. It came out shaky, borderline hysterical. What did I just agree to? She asked the empty room. The cafe didn't answer, but somewhere beneath the floorboards, beneath 200 years of foundation, beneath the bones of Paris itself, something ancient stirred. Waiting for 3:17 a.m., waiting for the girl who spoke the old tongue, waiting to wake fully. Finally, after 473 years of sleep. The first night Lysander came at 3:17 a.m. exactly. Seraphine was waiting. She had spent the day at 3 different coin dealers getting appraisals, hearing the same impossible numbers. The 30 coins were real, museum quality, worth between 1.8 and 2.4 million euros, depending on buyer and auction house. She could save the cafe 10 times over. The question that kept her awake was simple and terrible. What would it cost her? When the door chimed, she didn't jump. She had been watching the clock, watching the seconds tick closer to the moment he had appeared the night before. Some part of her had known he would come back, that whatever had started between them, it wasn't finished. Lysander stood in the doorway, backlit by the dying neon sign. He looked less human tonight. Or maybe Seraphine was just seeing him more clearly. The way his coat moved in air that wasn't stirring. The way his eyes caught light that didn't exist. The way the shadows around him seemed darker, deeper, like they were bowing. You came, Seraphine said. Did you doubt I would? She had, a little. Part of her had hoped last night was a dream, a psychotic break, carbon monoxide poisoning. But he was here. Real. Impossible. I have questions, she said. Lysander smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen on him, and it transformed his face from marble into something almost warm. Almost. I would be disappointed if you didn't. He moved to table 7, sat. But first you have a service to provide. That was our arrangement. Right. 30 days. Every night at 3:17 a.m. Seraphine made coffee. Her hands were steady. She had practiced this. Not the coffee, she could make coffee in her sleep, but the words, the old French. She carried the cup to table 7, set it down, met Lysander's silver eyes. Je vous sers avec gratitude, monseigneur. Que cette nuit vous apporte la paix. I serve you with gratitude, my lord. May this night bring you peace. The words became light again. Gold radiant pouring from her mouth like water. They wrapped around Lysander, sank into his skin, and he closed his eyes. For just a moment, he looked almost human, color in his cheeks, warmth instead of cold. He drank the coffee slowly, savoring it. When the cup was empty, he set it down and looked at her. Your questions, he said, ask. Seraphine sat across from him. What are you old? He said it simply, like it was the most important truth about him. I was born in 1312, turned in 1337. I ruled the Court of Shadows from 1349 until 1551. That's 202 years. Then I slept for 473 years, until you woke me. The numbers were too big, too impossible. You're a vampire. Yes. Vampires aren't real. And yet, he gestured to himself. Still here, still impossible. Seraphine's mind raced. Why did you sleep? Because I was tired. His voice went soft, distant. Tired of watching everyone I loved turn to dust. Tired of the hunger. Tired of being. He focused on her again. So I asked my last keeper to put me to sleep. She used the old tongue, the language of binding and ritual, and I slept beneath this building, waiting. For what? For someone to wake me. He leaned forward. The magic is specific. Only someone speaking the old tongue with genuine devotion could break the seal. Most people who learn dead languages do it academically, intellectually, but you, his eyes searched her face. You spoke with your heart. That's what woke me. Seraphine remembered the words she had used. Je vous sers de tout mon cœur, with all my heart. She had meant it. In that moment, exhausted and desperate and alone, she had meant it. What do you need from me? She asked. What I've always needed, what my court provided for 2 centuries. Lysander's voice was careful, measured. Devotion, words spoken in the old tongue. They sustain me. Feed me. Not blood, never blood, not anymore. Just belief, service. The kind of willing giving that humans rarely offer. For 30 days. Yes. And then you have your money, your cafe, your life back, and he paused. I decide if I want to stay awake or return to sleep. There was something in his voice, a loneliness so deep it made Seraphine's chest ache. The coins, she said, where do they come from? My treasury, buried with me. I have more. He pulled another pouch from his coat, set it on the table. Consider this the first week's payment, 75,000 euros. By the end of 30 days, you'll have your 500,000. Seraphine stared at the pouch, at him. Why? The word came out raw. Why me? Why this cafe? Lysander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. Because this building was constructed on the ruins of my court. Because the woman who put me to sleep, Catherine, was the daughter of the man who owned the inn that stood here before. Because for 200 years, the Rousseau family has unknowingly guarded my rest. He met her eyes. You're not random, Seraphine. Your legacy. The words settled over her like a shroud. Legacy. Her father had never mentioned vampires. Had never said anything about the family history beyond the cafe, the neighborhood, the long line of Rousseaus who had ground coffee beans and served pastries and watched Montmartre change around them. But he had taught her Old French, had given her Catherine's journal, had made sure she knew the words. Had he known I should go, Lysander said, standing, dawn is in 3 hours. I need to be underground before the sun rises. Will you come back tomorrow? Every night, for 30 days. He paused at the door. Unless you want to end our arrangement early. Seraphine thought about Isolde's face when she had ordered everyone out. Thought about Bastian's shock, Colette's rage, the 2 million euros in antique coins hidden in her apartment. No, she said. I don't want to end it. Lysander's smile was slow, approving. Good. He left. Seraphine sat alone in the cafe until sunrise, turning a gold coin over and over in her hands, wondering what she had really agreed to. 7 nights. 7 nights of Lysander appearing at 3:17 a.m. 7 nights of Seraphine serving him coffee in Old French, watching golden light pour from her mouth, feeling the words resonate in her bones like a tuning fork struck against the universe. 7 nights of conversation that stretched until dawn threatened. He told her about the Court of Shadows. 200 souls living beneath Montmartre, feeding on devotion instead of blood, creating art and music and philosophy in the dark. A paradise that lasted 2 centuries until it burned. She told him about her father, about studying at Sorbonne, about the cancer that took her mother when Seraphine was 5, leaving only a journal and a name and a hole in her chest that never quite healed. He didn't touch her, didn't try, but there was something in the way he looked at her, like she was water and he was dying of thirst, like she was the sun and he had forgotten what warmth felt like. It terrified her, it thrilled her. On the 8th night, everything changed. Seraphine arrived at the cafe at 2:38 a.m. to find Isolde waiting outside with 2 police officers. Her stepmother's face was a mask of righteous fury. There she is! Arrest her! Seraphine froze. What? These coins? Isolde held up a photograph. One of Seraphine's gold coins photographed at the dealer she had visited. They're stolen. From the Musée de Cluny. My stepdaughter has been selling priceless artifacts on the black market. The officers moved towards Seraphine. One of them, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, held up a hand. Mademoiselle Rousseau, we need to ask you some questions about how you acquired these coins. They were given to me, Seraphine said, her heart hammered, by a private collector. A collector, Isolde's voice dripped contempt. Is that what you're calling your clients now? The word hung in the air like poison. Clients. I'm not, Seraphine started. You show up with 2 million euros in antique coins after working the night shift alone in a cafe. Isolde's voice rose, carried. There were people on the street now gathering to watching. Everyone knows what that means. Everyone knows what you've been doing in there at 3 in the morning. The implication was clear. Brutal, designed for maximum damage. Seraphine felt her face burn. That's not, isn't it? Isolde turned to the growing crowd, to the neighbors who had known Seraphine since childhood, to the early morning vendors setting up their stalls. My poor stepdaughter, so desperate for money that she turned to prostitution. And when that wasn't enough, she started stealing from museums. That's a lie, Seraphine said. Her voice shook with rage. Is it? Then explain the coins. Explain the mysterious man everyone saw you with at the engagement party. Explain why you're here every night alone doing God knows what. Seraphine opened her mouth, closed it. What could she say? That a vampire gave her the coins, that she had made a deal with a creature from the 14th century, that the old French words she spoke at 3:17 on AM fed him in ways she still didn't fully understand. She would sound insane. The police officer stepped forward. Mademoiselle, I think it's best if you come to the station. We can sort this out there. I haven't done anything wrong, Seraphine said. Then you have nothing to worry about. The officer's voice was kind but firm. The crowd murmured. Seraphine could feel their judgment, their eyes, the way they looked at her and saw exactly what Isolde wanted them to see. A failure, a prostitute, a thief. The clock on the church tower struck 3. Seraphine looked at the cafe door, at the darkened windows, at the place where Lysander would appear in 17 minutes. She looked at Isolde's triumphant face. I want a lawyer, Seraphine said quietly. Of course you do. Isolde smiled. Guilty people always do. The police officers moved to either side of Seraphine, not touching her, not yet, but ready. The cafe door opened. Bastien stepped out, Colette on his arm. They must have been inside, waiting. Part of Isolde's plan. This is so sad, Colette said loud enough for the crowd to hear. We tried to help her, maman. We really did. I know, darling. Isolde's voice was all false sympathy. Some people just can't be saved. Bastien looked at Seraphine. There was something in his eyes. Not quite guilt, not quite pity, just emptiness. I'm sorry it came to this, he said. Seraphine laughed. It came out bitter, sharp. No, you're not. Bastien has been very helpful, Isolde said, providing information about your activities, about the man you've been seeing, about enough. The word cut through the night like a blade. Lysander stood at the edge of the crowd. Seraphine hadn't seen him approach, hadn't heard him. He was just there, sudden and absolute, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. He wore the same antique coat, the same impossible presence. But tonight there was something different, something dangerous in the set of his shoulders, the way he looked at Isolde, like a king looking at an insect. This doesn't concern you, Isolde said, her voice sharp. Lysander walked forward. The crowd parted for him without thinking. Instinct older than language, older than civilization. The hindbrain screaming predator. Run. He stopped in front of Seraphine, looked at the police officers. She has stolen nothing, he said quietly. Every coin came from me, from my private collection. Gifts, freely given. And you are, the female officer asked. Lysander Valcourt. He pulled a card from his pocket, handed it to her. You'll find I'm a registered antiquities dealer, licensed, documented, everything is legal. The officer examined the card, frowned. These coins are worth millions. Yes. Why would you give them to a waitress? Lysander's eyes found Seraphine, held her gaze. Because she serves a king, he said, and kings reward faithful service. The crowd went silent. Isolde's face drained of color. This is ridiculous. He's obviously lying to protect her. Am I? Lysander turned to her, took one step forward. Just one. Would you like me to explain exactly what service Seraphine provides in detail, in front of all these witnesses? There was something in his voice, A threat so absolute it didn't need to be spoken. Isolde took a step back. She speaks words I need to hear, Lysander continued. His voice was soft, deadly. In a language most people have forgotten, she provides comfort, companionship, peace. He looked at the crowd. Is that illegal? Is kindness a crime now? The police officer shifted uncomfortably. No, but then unless you have actual evidence of theft, I suggest you leave. Lysander's silver eyes caught the streetlight, reflected it back like mirrors. Seraphine Rousseau has broken no laws. She has done nothing but survive in a world that has taken everything from her. And I will not stand here and watch small, cruel people destroy her because they are threatened by her strength. The words rang out across the street. Undeniable. Absolute. Bastian looked away first. The female officer put away her notebook. We'll need to verify your credentials, Monsieur Valcourt. But if everything checks out, she looked at Isolde. False accusations are a serious matter, Madame Rousseau. Isolde's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Come, Lysander said to Seraphine. He offered his arm. We have an appointment. Seraphine took his arm, felt the ice-cold skin through his coat. Let him guide her through the crowd into the cafe away from the staring eyes and whispered judgments. The door closed behind them with a final click. Seraphine stood in the middle of the cafe shaking, not from fear, from rage, from humiliation, from the sheer exhaustion of being under siege for over 2 years with no end in sight. She called me a prostitute, she said. Her voice was very small. She's afraid, Lysander said. Of what? Of losing control. Of you. He moved to table 7. Sat. You're not who she thought you were. Not weak, not broken, not easy to destroy. That terrifies people like Isolde. Seraphine laughed. It sounded slightly hysterical. I am broken. I'm working a dead-end job in a cafe that's about to be sold. I'm alone. You woke a king, Lysander interrupted. His silver eyes blazed. You spoke words of power that haven't been heard in 500 years. You made light with your voice. You bound me to you with 7 words in Old French. He stood, crossed to her, stopped close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him. You are not broken, Seraphine Rousseau. You are a keeper, the last of a bloodline that served vampire courts for centuries. You have power you haven't even begun to understand. I don't feel powerful, she whispered. No. His voice gentled. You feel tired, betrayed, alone. But that will change. Why? He touched her face, just his fingertips against her cheek. Ice cold. I promise you that will change. Seraphine closed her eyes, leaned into the touch despite herself. Why are you helping me? She asked. Because you helped me first. Simple. True. Because in 8 nights you have given me more peace than I've had in 500 years. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth protecting. She opened her eyes. His face was inches from hers. Bastian, she said. He was working with Isolde. He knew what she was planning tonight. Yes. But why, what does he? That, a new voice said, is an excellent question. They both turned. A man stood in the cafe doorway. Tall, handsome, mid-30s in appearance, though something about him suggested he was much, much older. He wore an expensive suit. His smile was all sharp edges. Lysander went very still. Caspian. Lysander. The man stepped inside. His movements were too fluid, too perfect. Another vampire. I heard you were awake. I had to see for myself. You're not welcome here. No, Caspian looked around the cafe with exaggerated interest. Strange, I've been very welcome here for months. Haven't I, Bastian? Bastian stepped in from the street. Behind him, Colette. Both of them looked pale, frightened. I'm sorry, Bastian said. He wasn't looking at Seraphine. I didn't have a choice. Caspian laughed. Everyone has a choice. Bastian chose money. Quite a lot of it, actually. He turned to Seraphine. You must be the keeper, the one who woke our sleeping king. I've been very curious about you. Lysander moved, putting himself between Seraphine and Caspian. Leave now. Or what, you'll fight me? Caspian's smile widened. You've been asleep for half a millennium, old friend. I've been awake, training, growing stronger. Do you really think you can win? If I have to. How noble. Caspian's eyes slid to Seraphine. I have a better idea. I'll make you an offer, keeper. Serve me instead. I'll pay triple what Lysander is offering. 1.5 million euros. Plus, I won't ask you to waste your talent on sentiment and nostalgia. I'll help you understand what you really are. What you can really do. Seraphine's mind raced. What I can really do? You don't know, Caspian looked delighted. Oh, Lysander, you haven't told her. How cruel. He focused on Seraphine. Keepers don't just feed vampires with their words. They command us, control us. With the right training, the right knowledge, you could make any vampire do anything you wanted. Kneel, obey, die if you spoke the word correctly. Seraphine looked at Lysander. Is that true? His face was stone. Yes. And you didn't tell me. I didn't want to frighten you. Or give her ideas, Caspian added. Can't have the servant realizing she holds all the power, can we? He stepped closer. But I'm not afraid of powerful women, Seraphine. I appreciate them. Work with me. Together we could rule Paris. Every vampire in this city would bow to us. She's not interested, Lysander said. Let her speak for herself. Caspian's eyes never left Seraphine. What do you say, Keeper? Are you tired of being treated like you're worthless? I can give you everything. Power, wealth, respect. All you have to do is speak the words to me instead of him. It was tempting, God, it was tempting. The idea of making everyone who had ever heard her kneel, making Isolde beg, making Bastian crawl. But she looked at Lysander, at the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists, the fear in his silver eyes that he was trying so hard to hide. He thought she might say yes. Seraphine turned back to Caspian. No, she said simply. Caspian's smile vanished. Excuse me. I said no, I'm not interested in your offer. She moved to stand beside Lysander. I already have an arrangement. You're making a mistake, Caspian said. His voice had gone cold. Dangerous. That's my choice to make. Is it? Caspian looked at Bastian, nodded. Bastian pulled out his phone, made a call. 30 seconds later, Isolde swept back into the cafe. Behind her, 2 men in suits, lawyers Seraphine realized, and behind them, police. That's her, Isolde said, pointing at Seraphine. That's the girl who's been squatting in my cafe, trespassing. I want her arrested. This is my cafe, Seraphine said. No, Isolde pulled out a document. This is my cafe. You forfeited your inheritance when you failed to pay the estate taxes. It's all legal, all documented. She smiled. You have no claim here. You never did. Seraphine's world tilted. That's not... It's true, one of the lawyers confirmed. The estate taxes were due 6 months after your father's death. They weren't paid. The property defaulted to the next of kin. Madame Isolde Rousseau. I didn't know, Seraphine whispered. No one told me. Ignorance isn't an excuse. Isolde's voice was triumphant. You've been living here illegally, working here without permission. I want you out. Tonight. The police officers moved forward. Lysander growled, actually growled a sound that came from somewhere deep and animal and absolutely inhuman. The officers stopped. This is a setup, Lysander said. His voice shook with rage. Caspian orchestrated this, all of it. Did I? Caspian examined his nails. Or did I simply help Isolde understand her legal rights? You can't blame me for being a good Samaritan. You want the cafe, Seraphine said. Understanding flooded through her. That's what this is about. You want what's underneath. Very good, Caspian nodded. This building sits on top of the Court of Shadows. Lysander's treasury, his artifacts. 500 years of vampire history buried and forgotten. Worth billions to the right collector. He smiled. I've been waiting 50 years for someone to wake him, for the seal to break. Now that it has, I can finally claim what should have been mine all along. It was never yours, Lysander snarled. No, you abandoned it, went to sleep like a coward. That makes it salvage. Caspian gestured to Isolde and the lawyers. Once the cafe is demolished, I'll have full access, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Seraphine looked at Isolde, at the woman who had married her father, who had pretended to love him, who had taken everything. You knew, Seraphine said, about the vampires, about what's underneath. How long? Isolde's smile was all teeth. 3 years. 3 years. You killed him, Seraphine whispered. You killed my father. The cafe went silent. Prove it, Isolde said. I will. Seraphine's voice shook. I swear to God I will. Seraphine, Lysander said quietly. We need to leave, now. I'm not leaving. This is my... It's not. Not legally. Not anymore. He took her arm, gently but firmly. We'll fight this, but not here. Not tonight. The police moved closer. There were more of them now. 6, 8, too many. Caspian's smile was victorious. Game over, Keeper. You lose. Take me underground, Seraphine said to Lysander. He looked at her. What? The court. The chapel you told me about. Take me there. Show me. Understanding flashed in his silver eyes. Caspian will follow. Good. Seraphine looked at her stepmother, at Bastian, at Colette, at all the people who had taken and taken and taken. Let him. She turned to Caspian, spoke in old French, the words coming to her like breathing. Je vous défie, démon. Suivez-moi dans les ténèbres si vous l'osez. I challenge you, demon. Follow me into the dark if you dare. The words blazed golden in the air. Caspian's eyes went wide. Then he laughed. Oh, you're going to be fun to break. Lysander pulled Seraphine toward the back of the cafe, toward the kitchen, toward a door she had never noticed before, hidden behind a shelf of supplies. It opened onto stairs, leading down. They descended into darkness. Lysander's hand cold in hers, and behind them Seraphine could hear footsteps. Caspian, Isolde, police, all of them following. Into the tomb of kings, into the court of shadows, into 500 years of buried secrets. The stairs ended in a vast space carved from limestone. Cathedral ceilings stretched 3 stories high, walls covered in carvings, inscriptions, names. So many names. Lysander pulled out a torch, lit it with a match that burned blue. The flame illuminated the chapel, and Seraphine saw 283 names, carved into stone, each one with dates, all ending the same, 1551, the year the Court of Shadows burned. My God, she whispered. My people, Lysander said quietly. Every soul who served me, who trusted me, who died because I wasn't there to protect them. Seraphine walked along the wall, reading, Catherine Moreau, Henri Dubois, Marie Laurent, surnames she recognized, families that still lived in Montmartre, descendants of the court. And then she saw it, Catherine Rousseau, 1523 to 1551, beside the name carved in smaller letters, Last Keeper. My ancestor, Seraphine breathed. Yes. Lysander stood beside her. She was 18 when the fire came. She helped me escape. Then she used the old tongue to seal me into sleep to keep me safe until the danger had passed. She died doing it. The magic consumed her. Seraphine traced the letters with her fingers. Catherine Rousseau, a girl barely older than Seraphine herself, who had died to save a vampire king, who had started a legacy that had lasted 500 years. Behind them, footsteps on the stairs, voices. Caspian emerged into the chapel, followed by Isolde, Bastian, the lawyers, the police. They fanned out, taking in the space with awe and greed. Magnificent, Caspian breathed. Even better than I imagined. This is a historical site, Lysander said. Protected. You can't touch it. Can't I? Caspian pulled out his phone. I have a dozen archaeologists on speed dial who will declare this structurally unsound, dangerous, in need of immediate excavation and preservation, he smiled, which I will generously fund. And during the excavation, I'll find every artifact, every coin, every scrap of vampire history. He looked at Lysander. You may have built this court, but I'm going to profit from it. Seraphine's hand found a leather-bound book on a stone altar, Catherine's journal. She knew it without opening it, could feel the weight of it, the history. She opened to the first page. The words were in Old French. Beautiful flowing script. I, Catherine Rousseau, keeper of the Court of Shadows, do hereby record the truth, so that when the king wakes he will know, so that my descendants will understand, so that the light will not be forgotten. Seraphine turned the page, started reading, and learned the truth about the night the Court of Shadows died, about the woman who killed them, about the poison that had burned for 500 years waiting for the bloodline to come full circle. She looked up at Isolde. Arsenic, Seraphine said quietly. That's what you used, isn't it? That's how you killed my father. Isolde went very still. Small doses, Seraphine continued, over 3 years, slow enough that it looked like heart failure, fast enough that he never suspected. She held up the journal. Catherine wrote about it, about the poisoner, about the woman who wanted access to the court, who married the guardian to get close, who killed him when he wouldn't give her what she wanted. Seraphine's voice shook. Your ancestor, Isolde. Marguerite Beaumont. She's the one who set the fire, who killed 300 people, who tried to steal the treasury. You can't prove that, Isolde snapped. Can't I? Seraphine looked at the police officers. Exhume my father's body. Test for arsenic. It stays in bone for decades. You'll find it. Isolde's face went white. She's lying, Colette said, but her voice wavered. No, Seraphine said. I'm not, and I can prove all of it. Catherine documented everything. including the fact that this chapel is legally protected under French heritage law, has been since 1889. Any attempt to excavate requires approval from the Ministry of Culture. She looked at Caspian, which you'll never get. Caspian's smile faltered. One of the police officers stepped forward, the female one from earlier. She looked at Isolde with new eyes. Madame Rousseau, she said carefully, I think we need to have a conversation. At the station. This is absurd, Isolde said. You're going to believe the ravings of a desperate girl over a woman whose husband died of sudden heart failure at 48 with no previous medical history. The officer's voice was hard. Yes, I am. We'll be opening an investigation. Immediately. Isolde's face twisted with rage. Caspian, do something. Caspian looked at Lysander, at Seraphine, at the chapel full of witnesses. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, Lysander agreed. It's not, but you've lost this round. Caspian turned and walked up the stairs. After a moment's hesitation, Bastian followed. Colette looked at Seraphine. There were tears in her eyes. Did she really, our father, did she? I don't know, Seraphine said, more gently than Colette had deserved. But if she poisoned mine, you should probably check. Colette fled. The police took Isolde by the arms, read her rights in flat official voices. She didn't fight, just stared at Seraphine with such hatred that it felt like a physical blow. You'll pay for this, Isolde hissed. Everything I've done, everything I've built, you'll destroy it all, won't you? Yes, Seraphine said simply. I will. They led Isolde away. The lawyers followed, already making phone calls, already building defenses. And then there was silence. Seraphine and Lysander stood alone in the chapel, surrounded by names of the dead, holding the journal of the last keeper. She killed your father, Lysander said quietly. I know. You must be. I'm numb. Seraphine sat down on the stone floor, let the journal fall into her lap. I should be crying, or screaming, or something, but I just feel empty. Lysander sat beside her, didn't touch her, just sat. She'll go to prison, he said, maybe, if they can prove it. They will. Arsenic leaves traces. And I know people, very old people with very long memories and very good lawyers. He looked at her. She won't escape justice, Seraphine. I promise you that. Seraphine nodded, stared at the names on the wall. Catherine died to save you, she said. She was 18. Yes. I'm 24, 6 years older, and I'm sitting here feeling sorry for myself because my stepmother is a murderer and my ex-boyfriend is working for your enemy and my cafe is being stolen out from under me. She laughed. It sounded broken. Catherine faced down fire and death and the end of everything. And I can't even... You faced down, Isolde, Lysander interrupted. You challenged Caspian. You read a 500-year-old journal and put together the pieces that no one else saw. You got justice for your father. You saved this chapel. He turned her face toward his. Catherine would be proud. I'm proud. Seraphine's eyes burned. I don't know what to do next. Next, Lysander said, we make sure the cafe stays yours. We fight Isolde's claim. We find every legal weapon we have, and we bury her with them. His silver eyes blazed. And we prepare for Caspian's next move, because he won't stop. Not until he has what he wants. What does he want? The same thing I want. Lysander's voice went soft. You. The word hung in the air between them. Me. You're a keeper, Seraphine, the first in 500 years. With training, you could command every vampire in Paris. That kind of power. He shook his head. Caspian wants to use it. I want to protect it. And you get to decide what it becomes. Seraphine looked at her hands, at the golden light that had poured from her lips, at the power she hadn't known she had. Teach me, she said. What unteach me? Everything. How to use the old tongue, how to command vampires, how to protect myself. She met his eyes. If I'm going to be a keeper, I'm going to be a damn good one. Lysander smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen on him, full of warmth and pride and something that might have been hope. Tomorrow night, he said, we begin. But tomorrow never came, because when they climbed back up the stairs back into the cafe, they found it in ruins. Tables overturned, windows shattered, and written on the wall in something dark and wet, last warning, give me the keeper or I burn everything. The signature bled into the plaster like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Caspian. Lysander stood in front of her, his body rigid, every muscle coiled for violence. The air around him had gone arctic. When he spoke, his voice was barely human. He came into your home. Not our home. Your home. Like he understood what this place meant. what it had always meant. Seraphine walked through the wreckage. Her father's favorite table number 7 had been split clean in half. The espresso machine her grandmother bought in 1972 lay on its side pipes, torn out water pooling across the floor. Every window facing the street was shattered glass glittering in the pre-dawn light like diamonds scattered across a grave. 200 years. 200 years of coffee and conversation and family, and Caspian had destroyed it in minutes. To prove a point, to show her what he could take. Seraphine picked up a piece of the broken table, ran her fingers along the crack. Her father had sat here every morning for 20 years, had taught her to read at this table, had shown her Catherine's journal, his voice soft with reverence, telling her about the family legacy she didn't understand yet. She understood now. "He thinks I'll be afraid," she said quietly. Lysander turned to look at her. "Aren't you terrified?" She set down the wood, met his silver eyes. "But I'm done running. I'm done letting people take things from me." She gestured at the destruction. "This is mine. The cafe, the chapel, the legacy. Catherine died to protect it. My father spent his life guarding it without even knowing what he was protecting. And I'll be damned if I let some parasite steal it because he thinks I'm weak." "You're not weak." "No." Seraphine felt something crystallize inside her, something hard and bright and absolute. "I'm a keeper, the last of my line, and it's time I started acting like it." She walked to the wall, to the message written in blood, placed her hand against it, spoke in old French, the words coming from somewhere deeper than memory. From Catherine, from every Rousseau woman who had stood in this place and refused to break. "Par mon sang et ma volonté je réclame ce qui est mien. Aucun voleur ne prendra ce que j'ai juré de protéger. By my blood and my will I claim what is mine. No thief will take what I have sworn to protect." The blood on the wall began to glow gold. The same impossible light that poured from her mouth when she spoke the old tongue. It spread across the message, consuming it, burning it away until the wall was clean. White, unmarked. The broken table began to mend itself. Wood flowing back together like water. The espresso machine righted pipes reattaching with soft clicks. Glass shards rose from the floor, floated through the air, settled back into window frames, and fused seamless. In 30 seconds, the cafe was whole again. Seraphine staggered. The world tilted. Lysander caught her before she fell, his arms ice cold, his strength the only thing keeping her upright. "What did you do?" he asked. His voice was full of awe and something that might have been fear. "I don't know." Seraphine's hands were shaking. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him destroy this place." "You rewrote reality." Lysander helped her to a chair. "Keepers can command vampires, I told you that. But what you just did, that's something else, something older. Catherine could do it. Catherine could barely light a candle with the old tongue." He knelt in front of her, his silver eyes searching her face. "You're stronger than she was. Stronger than any keeper I've known. Which means Caspian will want you even more desperately. And he'll do anything to take you. Let him try." The words came out braver than Seraphine felt, but she meant them. She was done being prey. Lysander smiled, sharp, dangerous, proud. "Then we need to prepare for war." They had 4 hours until sunrise. Lysander spent them teaching Seraphine the words, not just serving words, fighting words, commands in Old French that could freeze a vampire mid-strike, could force them to their knees, could make them feel pain they hadn't experienced in centuries. "Language is power," Lysander explained. They were in the chapel beneath the cafe, surrounded by the names of the dead. "For vampires, words spoken in the old tongue bypass will. We can't resist. We can only obey." He looked at her. "That's why keepers were so valuable and so dangerous. One wrong word from you, and I would have no choice but to follow. Even if I told you to walk into sunlight. Even then." The weight of that settled over Seraphine like a shroud. This power Catherine had died protecting. This power Caspian wanted to steal. "Show me," she said. Lysander taught her the command for stillness. "Fige." She spoke it. The word blazed gold. Lysander's body locked in place, muscles rigid, unable to move. His eyes were the only thing still alive, watching her, waiting. "How long?" Seraphine asked. "Until you release me." His voice was strained. "Or until the sun rises and I burn." She spoke the release. "Libéré." Lysander gasped, stumbling forward. Color flooded back into his already pale face. "That," he said, breathing hard, "is what Caspian wants. Imagine commanding an army of vampires, all of them frozen, unable to fight back, unable to resist. He met her eyes. You could conquer Paris in a night. I don't want to conquer anything. Seraphine's hands were shaking again. I just want my cafe back. And my life. And for people to stop trying to take things from me. I know. Lysander's voice gentled. But Caspian doesn't care what you want. He only cares what you can give him. They practiced until dawn threatened. Words for pain, words for protection, words for binding and breaking and commanding the air itself to obey. By the time Lysander had to retreat underground, Seraphine's voice was hoarse and her head pounded. But she could speak 6 words of power without hesitation. 6 words that could stop a vampire cold. It would have to be enough. Caspian came at noon. Seraphine was restocking the coffee beans when she felt it. A change in the air. A coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. She looked up. 20 vampires stood outside the cafe, all of them young, all of them beautiful, all of them staring at her through the windows with eyes that glowed red in the midday sun. Impossible. Vampires couldn't walk in daylight, except these were. Their skins smoked slightly like they were standing too close to a fire, but they didn't burn, didn't flee. Caspian stood at their center. He wore sunglasses, his hands covered in leather gloves. Protected, but clearly in pain. He smiled at her through the glass, gestured for her to come outside. Seraphine's first instinct was to run, lock the doors, call Lysander, call the police, call anyone. But Lysander was underground, asleep, vulnerable. If Caspian's people got to him before sunset, they could kill him while he slept. She walked outside. The street was empty. Too empty. Like everyone in Montmartre had suddenly decided to be somewhere else. She could see curtains twitching in windows. People hiding, watching. You've been busy, Caspian said. His voice was conversational, pleasant, like they were discussing the weather. Learning to use your gifts, very impressive. The cafe looks beautiful. I especially like the touch with the blood. Dramatic. What do you want? I think you know. He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were crimson, ancient. I want you. Your power. Your bloodline. Everything Catherine Rousseau died to protect. He stepped closer. His skin was blistering in the sun, healing almost as fast as it burned. I've developed a certain tolerance. It hurts, but I can endure pain for what I want. I'm not going with you. No, he gestured. 2 of his vampires grabbed a woman from the crowd, a neighbor, Madame Fontaine, who had lived next to the cafe for 40 years. She screamed. Here's how this works, Caspian said. You come with me willingly or I start killing everyone on this street. One by one, publicly, until you agree. He looked at Madame Fontaine. Should we start with her? Seraphine's mind raced. She could speak a command, freeze them all. But 20 vampires, could she even control that many at once? Let her go, Seraphine said. Come with me. Let her go first. Caspian laughed, nodded. The vampires released Madame Fontaine. She ran stumbling, crying, Your word, Caspian said. Swear you'll serve me. In Old French, bind yourself the way you bound Lysander. Seraphine opened her mouth. Don't. The voice came from behind Caspian. Male. Young. Absolutely certain. A man stepped forward from the crowd. Late 20s, dark hair, green eyes. He wore tactical gear, carried weapons Seraphine didn't recognize, and moved like someone who had spent his life hunting things that hunted humans. Behind him 30 more, all armed. All focused on the vampires with the kind of intensity that came from experience. Hunters. Theodore Rousseau, the man said. Not to Caspian, to Seraphine. I've been looking for you for a very long time. Seraphine's world stopped. Theodore. Theo, her brother. The brother who had been taken when she was barely old enough to remember. Kidnapped from their front yard when he was 3 years old. The brother her father had searched for until the day he died. The brother everyone said was dead. You're alive, she whispered. So are you. Theo's eyes were the same green as their father's. The same green Seraphine saw in the mirror every morning. And you're not going anywhere with this parasite. He raised a weapon, fired. Silver bullets tore through the air. 3 of Caspian's vampires went down screaming, their bodies smoking and convulsing. The street erupted into chaos. Hunters fought vampires. Civilians scattered. Blood sprayed across cobblestones that had stood for 200 years and had never seen this much violence. Caspian grabbed Seraphine, pulled her against his chest. His hand around her throat. Call them off, when he hissed in her ear, or I snap your neck. Theo froze, aimed at Caspian's head. Let her go. Make me. Fjay, Seraphine gasped. The word barely made it past Caspian's grip on her throat, barely had enough power behind it. But it was enough. Caspian's hand loosened, just for a second, just long enough. Seraphine dropped, rolled, came up running. Theo caught her, pulled her behind him. Are you hurt? No, She looked at him, really looked, at the scar across his cheek, at the hardness in his eyes, at the birthmark on his wrist, the same wine-dark stain their father had carried. You're really my brother. Yeah, his smile was brief, tired. We have a lot to talk about, but first, he aimed at Caspian. We deal with this. Caspian had recovered. His face was twisted with rage. Hunters, of course. Always meddling, always self-righteous. He looked at Theo. You think you can stop me? I've killed 100 hunters. What's 30 more? You killed my family, Theo said quietly. My parents, when you took me as a child. Do you even remember? Caspian tilted his head. Vaguely. They got in the way, saw something they shouldn't have. It was easier to eliminate the witnesses and take the child. He shrugged. You should thank me. I sold you to a hunter compound. They trained you well. Theo's finger tightened on the trigger. Wait, Seraphine said. She stepped forward. He's mine. Theo looked at her. Sarah, he destroyed my cafe, threatened my neighbors, tried to steal my power. She met Caspian's crimson eyes. And he's been feeding information to Isolde for 3 years, teaching her how to poison our father slowly enough that no one would suspect. The street went silent. You have proof, Theo asked. Catherine's journal. She documented the poison used 500 years ago, the same poison Isolde used, the same poison Caspian taught her family to make. Seraphine pulled the journal from her bag. Marguerite Beaumont learned it from a vampire named Caspian Mordain, who promised her wealth and power in exchange for access to the Court of Shadows. Theo's face went white. He killed our father. Isolde killed our father, Seraphine corrected, but he taught her how. Caspian smiled. Prove it. I will. Seraphine held up the journal. This is a historical document, protected under French law, admissible as evidence, and I have something else. She pulled out her phone. A recording from 3 nights ago. Isolde confessing to poisoning our father. She thought I was asleep. She was on the phone with you, Caspian, talking about the plan, about how long the arsenic would take to kill him, about how no one would suspect. It was a lie. She didn't have a recording. But Caspian didn't know that. His smile faltered. The police already have the body, Seraphine continued. They're running tests. When they find arsenic in the bones, they'll need someone to blame. And I have a recording of Isolde naming you as her teacher. She stepped closer. You're going to hang for this, Caspian. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. You're bluffing. Am I? Seraphine pulled out the phone. Hit play. Isolde's voice tinny through the speaker. Arsenic like you taught me. Small doses. He never suspected it wasn't real. It was a voice modulator app. A trick. But it sounded real enough. Caspian's face twisted. You little... The ground beneath the cafe trembled. Stone cracked. The street buckled. And from the darkness below, something rose. Lysander. He shouldn't be awake. The sun was high. It should have been impossible. But he stood in the entrance to the cafe, his coat billowing, his silver eyes blazing, and his skin was smoking, burning, blistering in the daylight. You threatened her. His voice was barely human, all gravel and fury and something older than language. You came to her home. You put your hands on her. He took a step forward, his skin charred, flaked, healed, and burned again. I told you what would happen if you touched her. You'll die in the sun, Caspian said, but his voice shook. Yes. Lysander took another step. Another. But not before I kill you. He moved faster than Seraphine could see, faster than Caspian could react. One moment he was at the cafe door, the next his hand was through Caspian's chest. Caspian screamed. Lysander pulled back, held something dark and pulsing in his fist. Your heart, he said calmly. I believe you'll want this back. He threw it into the sun. It burst into flames, turned to ash. Caspian collapsed, his body spasming. Not dead. Not yet, but dying. The remaining vampires fled, ran, scattered like roaches when the light hit. Theo's hunters let them go. They were staring at Lysander with a mixture of awe and terror. Lysander turned to Seraphine. His skin was blackened, cracked, weeping something dark. He was dying. The sun was killing him second by second. "You're safe," he said. Then his legs gave out. Seraphine caught him. "Get inside, now, the chapel, underground." "Can't, too weak." "Figez le soleil," Seraphine said. The words ripped out of her. "Arrête ta lumière, laisse-le vivre." Freeze the sun, stop your light, let him live. The words blazed so bright everyone had to look away. Golden light poured from Seraphine's mouth, from her hands, from every part of her, and it wrapped around Lysander like a cocoon. The sun's rays bent, curved, avoided him. Impossible. You couldn't command the sun. But Seraphine just had. She dragged Lysander into the cafe, into the shadows, down the stairs to the chapel where the sun couldn't reach. Theo and his hunters followed. In the chapel, surrounded by the names of the dead, Lysander's skin began to heal. Slowly. Too slowly. "He needs blood," Theo said. He was kneeling beside them, his hunter, training kicking in. "Vampire healing requires blood." "I don't take blood," Lysander rasped. "Not in 500 years." "You will now." Theo pulled out a knife. "Or you'll die." "No." Lysander's hand found Seraphine's. "No blood. I won't. I can't." "Then what?" Seraphine's voice broke. "How do I save you? The words." He looked at her with those silver eyes. "Speak them. The way Catherine did. Seal me. Put me back to sleep. I'll heal. Eventually." "That killed her." "I know. I'm not letting you sleep for another 500 years." Seraphine's hands were shaking. "There has to be another way." "There is," Theo said quietly, "but you're not going to like it." He pulled out Catherine's journal, flipped to the last page. The words were barely legible. Written in a shaking hand, Catherine's last entry before she died. "If the king is wounded beyond healing," Theo read, "and the keeper wishes to save him, there is one way. The binding of blood and word. The keeper offers herself fully, not as servant, as equal, bound by choice, bound by love. The magic will transform her, make her what he is, and together they will be stronger than either alone." The chapel went silent. "It's a transformation ritual," Theo said. "You become a vampire. And the bond between you, the one you created when you first spoke the serving words it completes, becomes permanent." "No," Lysander said. "Absolutely not. I won't ask that of you." "You're not asking." Seraphine looked at Theo. "What do I need to do?" "Sarah, please. Do I let you die?" She cupped Lysander's face. "Do I let you slip away because I'm afraid of what I might become? Or do I choose you? Choose this life. Choose power and responsibility and forever." Lysander's eyes were full of pain. "You don't know what you're giving up." "Yes, I do. Sunlight, aging, a normal life." She smiled. It felt surprisingly steady. "All things I never really had anyway. But I know what I'm gaining. You. The court. The legacy Catherine died to protect. A purpose." She looked around the chapel, at all those names. "I'm the last keeper, Lysander. If I don't do this, the line ends. Everything Catherine sacrificed for everything my father guarded without knowing it all ends with me dying of old age in a cafe that gets torn down for condos." "There are worse endings," Lysander whispered. "There are better ones, too." She turned to Theo. "Tell me how." The ritual was simple. Terrible, simple. Seraphine spoke the words in Old French. Ancient words, binding words. Words that rewrote the fabric of what she was and made her into something new. "Je choisis cette nuit éternelle. Je choisis ce roi et sa couronne. Je choisis le pouvoir et le prix. Par mon sang et ma volonté, je deviens ce que je dois être. I choose this eternal night. I choose this king and his crown. I choose the power and the price. By my blood and my will, I become what I must be." The words burned. Gold became white, became something beyond color. Lysander bit his wrist. Offered it to her. Seraphine drank. The blood was cold. Wrong. Every instinct screamed to stop. She didn't stop. The transformation took 3 minutes. It felt like 3 centuries. Her heart stopped. Started again. Slower. Stronger. Her senses exploded. She could hear every heartbeat in the chapel. Could smell copper and stone and Lysander's impossible scent like winter and smoke. Could see in the darkness like it was noon. Her canine teeth lengthened, sharpened. When it was over, she was still Seraphine, but also not. "How do you feel?" Lysander asked. He was healed, whole. The bond between them had fed him as she transformed. "Powerful," Seraphine said. Her voice sounded different, richer, and hungry. "That fades." He pulled her close. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted this for you." "I know." She kissed him, soft, sure. "But I wanted it. And that's what matters. Theo cleared his throat. We should go up. The police will be here soon. And you'll want to be there when they arrest Isolde. Right. The outside world. Still existing. Still demanding justice. They climbed the stairs together. Seraphine moved differently now, faster, smoother, like the world had been in slow motion before, and someone finally hit play. The street was full of people, neighbors, police, news cameras. And in the center of it all, Isolde, in handcuffs, screaming. She's lying. She faked that recording. I never poisoned anyone. The female police officer from before the one with kind eyes held up a paper. We have the autopsy results, Madame Rousseau. Your husband was full of arsenic, lethal doses, administered over approximately 3 years. She looked at Isolde with disgust. You're under arrest for murder. Isolde's face went white. Then she saw Seraphine. You, she hissed. You did this. You destroyed everything. No, Seraphine said calmly. You destroyed yourself. Colette and Margot stood to the side, both crying, both broken. Colette stepped forward. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what she did. I believe you, Seraphine said. And surprisingly, she did. Bastian was there too, looking small, ashamed. I'm sorry, he said. Caspian paid me, a lot. I didn't know he would get out, Seraphine said quietly, and never come back to Montmartre again. He left. Head down, destroyed. The police led Isolde away. She screamed the whole time. Threats, curses, promises of revenge. No one listened. The crowd turned to Seraphine, hundreds of people, neighbors who had watched her grow up, customers who had bought coffee from her father, strangers who had just witnessed a vampire kill another vampire to protect a human woman. Lysander stepped beside her, took her hand. People of Paris, he said. His voice carried, commanded. I am Lysander Valcourt, king of the Court of Shadows. 500 years ago I ruled beneath this city. Today I return, not as a threat, as a guardian. He gestured to Seraphine. This woman, Seraphine Rousseau, is my keeper, my equal, my queen. She has bound herself to me by choice. And together we will protect Montmartre from those who would do it harm. Silence. Then someone started clapping. Madame Fontaine. The woman Caspian's vampires had grabbed. Others joined. Applause rolled through the crowd, not everyone. Some people looked terrified, disgusted, but enough to matter. Theo stepped forward. I'm Theodore Rousseau, Seraphine's brother, leader of the European Hunter Guild. He looked at Lysander, then at Seraphine. For 200 years, my organization has hunted vampires, killed them. No mercy, no exceptions. He paused. But today, I saw a vampire walk into sunlight to protect a human woman. Saw him sacrifice himself. Saw him choose her safety over his own survival. He turned to his hunters. That's not a monster. That's a man worth respecting. He held out his hand to Lysander. Lysander stared at it, then took it. The war is over, Theo said, at least between us. The crowd erupted in cheers. Seraphine stood in the center of it all, transformed, powerful, no longer the waitress everyone pitied, no longer the failed daughter, no longer small. Lysander pulled her close, knelt before her in front of hundreds of witnesses. You're not my servant, he said clearly. You never were. You're my queen, my partner. The woman who saved me when I had forgotten what salvation felt like. He pulled a ring from his pocket. Black stone set in silver. Will you rule beside me? Will you help me rebuild the court? Will you be mine as I am yours for as long as forever lasts? Seraphine looked at the ring, at Lysander, at the crowd, at Theo, her brother, smiling through tears, at the cafe behind them, whole hers, at the life she had chosen. Yes, she said. The crowd went wild. Lysander stood, kissed her. And in that moment, Seraphine Rousseau, 24 years old, orphan vampire keeper, felt something she hadn't felt in over 2 years. Joy. 3 months later, Café Lumière had never been busier. Every table full, every seat taken, a line out the door and down the block. Seraphine moved through the crowd with inhuman grace, serving coffee, taking orders, chatting with regulars. She worked the day shift now. Had to. The sunlight didn't burn her the way it burned other vampires, some side effect of the transformation. The keeper magic protecting her. Lysander said it was unprecedented, that she was the first vampire in history who could walk in daylight without pain. Seraphine thought it was practical. Someone had to run the cafe during business hours. The Court of Shadows had been reestablished, not in secret, publicly, officially, with government approval and everything. 40 vampires lived beneath Montmartre, now feeding on the willing devotion of humans who understood what they were getting into. Artists, philosophers, people who wanted to create something that would outlast their mortal lives. It wasn't perfect. There were protests, petitions, people who thought vampires should be eradicated, not integrated. But it was working. Theo had been instrumental, using his influence in the Hunter Guild to broker peace, to create guidelines, to make sure no vampire crossed the line from feeding to killing. He visited the cafe every Tuesday, had coffee with his sister, told her about his life, the 26 years they had lost. He had been raised by hunters after Caspian sold him. Had thought his entire family was dead until he saw Seraphine's face on the news standing beside Lysander, transforming into something that should have been his enemy. But she was his sister, and that mattered more than centuries of hatred. Colette and Margot had apologized, publicly. In front of 200 witnesses at a town hall meeting, they had lost everything. Isolde's money was seized, her properties sold to pay restitution. The daughters were left with nothing. Seraphine had offered them jobs at the cafe. They had refused, too proud, too ashamed. But every week an envelope appeared under the cafe door. Cash, enough to pay rent, enough to eat. Seraphine never asked where they went, but the envelopes kept coming. Isolde was in prison. Life sentence. No parole. The arsenic in their father's bones had been undeniable. The journal provided motive. The case was airtight. She wrote letters, screaming, threatening, begging. Seraphine burned them without reading. Bastien had left Paris. Last she heard he was in London, working some corporate job, engaged to someone he had met online. She didn't care. That chapter was closed. Caspian had survived. Barely. Lysander had exiled him to the Americas with a warning: if he ever returned to Europe, the punishment would be final. Seraphine suspected they would see him again someday. But not today. Not for a long time. At 6:00 p.m. the cafe closed. Seraphine locked the door, turned off the lights. Lysander was waiting in the chapel. He spent most of his time there now, cataloging the artifacts, preserving the history, making sure Catherine's legacy lived on. He looked up when Seraphine entered, smiled. "Good day?" he asked. "Exhausting. 3 tour groups, 1 marriage proposal. Someone tried to pay for their coffee with a live chicken." "Montmartre," Lysander said fondly. Seraphine sat beside him on the stone floor, looked at the names on the wall. 283 souls. All dead, all remembered. "Do you think they'd approve," she asked, "of what we're doing?" "Catherine would." Lysander touched her ancestor's name. She wanted the court to survive, to evolve, to be more than it was. He looked at Seraphine. "You've done that, made it better, stronger, open." "We've done that," she corrected. They sat in comfortable silence. King and queen, vampire and keeper. Partners. "I got a letter today," Seraphine said, "from the Ministry of Culture. They want to designate this chapel as a historical monument. Protected, preserved, open to the public 3 days a week." "What did you say?" "I said yes, with conditions, no excavation, no removing artifacts, and every visitor has to learn the real history. No sanitizing, no lies, just truth." Lysander's smile was slow, proud. "Perfect." Seraphine's phone buzzed, a text from Theo. "Dinner tomorrow, bringing someone I want you to meet." She showed it to Lysander. He raised an eyebrow. "A girlfriend?" "Probably. He's been secretive." "You're going to interrogate her?" "Obviously. I'm his sister. It's my job." They climbed the stairs together, back to the cafe, to the life they were building. On the wall behind the counter, Seraphine had hung a photograph. Her father, smiling, holding a coffee cup, looking exactly the way she wanted to remember him. Beside it, a new photograph. Catherine Rousseau, age 18. The last keeper before Seraphine. 2 legacies. 2 women who had given everything to protect something bigger than themselves. Seraphine touched both pictures, made a promise. "I won't let this end, not ever. This cafe, this court, this family. I'll guard it, protect it, make it grow." She looked at Lysander. "We both will." "Yes," he said simply. "We will." Outside, Paris glittered. The Eiffel Tower lit against the night sky, the Seine reflecting 1,000 lights. Montmartre perched above it all, watching, guarding, enduring. In the cafe window, a new sign hung beside the menu. Café Lumière, serving Paris for 200 years, now and forever. Seraphine stood on the balcony, looked out over the city she had claimed, the life she had chosen. They had called her worthless, barren, broken, a failure. But she wasn't any of those things. She was Seraphine Rousseau, keeper, queen, guardian of the Court of Shadows. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. And this story, this was only the beginning.